Welcome to today's live event, finishing up step 3 of the 7-step reset. Step 3 is a big one. It's a little tiny step because it's only a second, but it's big in terms of its impact on our lives. It's the gateway to our life design, or it could be the anchor that holds us back. Today I'll be talking about 2 opportunities in step 3 that you can take. Now, we talked before about changing the template, and this is in that 7 phases, the 7 phases of that 1 second, the 1 second model. So we have an opportunity to change the template on the front end so that we receive information coming in differently than what we would have done otherwise. And then the other thing that we can do is to change the template on the way out. So if you think about step 3 sits between the pre-stimulus and the response. Now, when you hear about stimulus response, they collapse. That statement collapses reaction and response. I advocate keeping them separate because the reaction is coming from the network of neurons, aka subconscious, whereas the response has the input from the conscious mind and from data and from the environment, from the real environment, not what's perceived. Remember, the network of neurons is all about the past. It's associations. And those associations, by definition, are the past. So habits reside in the network of neurons. So today we'll do a quick recap. I don't want to go too far into it because the information is out on 7stepreset.com/live. And I'll be repeating the 7-step reset each month, but at a different level. So here's what I'm talking about. This is under the umbrella of dynamic leadership, and dynamic leadership is exactly what it sounds. It's dynamic, it's moving, it's adjusting. But what's masked in that word is that people don't perceive how fast life actually happens. Life is happening at the conditioned response level. Associations, network of neurons, 11 million bits per second. So dynamic leadership is all about moving at that speed, which is why I say it's making emotional intelligence actionable. Emotional intelligence does a great job of conveying the research that gets what's behind intrinsic motivation. How do you keep people engaged? How do you keep people focused? It's aligned with self-determination theory, the autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And all of those work together, and they're involved, and they're foundational to dynamic leadership. So in dynamic leadership, or I should say in emotional intelligence, we have this self-aware. These are the 4 pillars: self-awareness and self-management. This is necessary for agency. I talk often about agency and personal leadership. It's all here. If we don't have self-awareness and we don't have self-management, you're not going to have agency because you can be hijacked at any time. If you're not aware of your surroundings, you're going to be making calls that perhaps are not the right call based on what's going on around you. Social awareness is involved too, because if you're a leader, as your environment changes, even if you're not leading, we're always leading something, right? As the environment changes, we have to adjust. We can't control other people, but we can influence the environment. So having that ability for self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management is predictive, and it's also it's iterative, right? Because as you make changes, you have to be able to assess what's going on. So it's predictive, it's iterative, and it's an assessment of a constant assessment. And we need it to be happening at the speed of light. That's what I mean when I say speed of light. It's 11 million bits per second. You can't think about, well, what's the amygdala doing and what's happening with the prefrontal cortex, and is my brainstem handing that off? Even if you could think about it like that in real time, how do you change it? So that's why I have this 7-step reset to take that process that happens 33,000 times a day which is this. They tell us that we make 33,000 decisions a day, but we also know that 95% of everything we do is done by habit. So you would assume that, okay, we're somewhere north of 30,000 times a day. But it's actually more than that if you get into the microstimulus response cycles, because we're having multiple microstimulus response cycles every second, which means with 65,000 seconds a day, and you're having multiple of those per second, you can see you're easily over 100,000 stimulus response cycles a day. Now, most of these are going under the radar. You don't even know it's happening. It's unconscious, but it's the habits of the past. We've run these habits over and over and over. It's just like driving past an exit on the freeway that you didn't mean to drive past. You drove past it because it's habit, and similarly, you may have gone past a few exits and don't even recall going past them because it was happening in the background at the unconscious level. So we want to bring some of that conscious, not all of it, but we have to bring enough of it conscious so that we have the agency and personal leadership. Now, what happens is with that 33,000 decisions per day, we're going through the 7-step reset. This is the pre-stimulus, what I just showed on the previous slide, and then we have the conditioned reaction and then the response. So if this is happening over 30,000 times a day, this step here, step 2, is an important one. This step is so important because it precedes step 3. It's the last step that we can actually execute control. Step 3, the stimulus is coming from often external, not always, it could be from internal as well. But we're being bombarded with stimuli every single day. The step 2 is the one where we maintain our agency, where we maintain control. This is the check-in. I talk about mental, physical, spiritual, emotional state of being, as well as your self-image. And you can assess where you are with your self-image just by your self-talk and how that's working. And then step 3 is where we've been spending some time. It's 250 milliseconds. It's a reaction based on your life design, updated conditioning, automaticity, but it's actually, there's 7 phases of it in that one step 3, which is depicted on this slide. So here we have, and this is what people don't realize, is there's a pre-listening phase. So even before the stimulus comes in, we're already preset for it. Now this is even before priming. This is even before cognitive biases. Those come into play here when the stimulus is detected. But this happens, if you're riding a bicycle and you're coming up across an intersection that's kind of busy, you may notice yourself covering the brake. That's going to reduce your action, right? The action step is going to be faster for you to get on the brakes, and plus you're now ready for it. So when you are moving through life, the awareness is constantly looking at your environment and making adjustments. This is how you can walk into a room and feel stressed, or you walk into a place and you feel relaxed. It's this tension, it just happens, and it could have to do with people in the room, it could have to do with anchors. You may have spotted something. Remember, the subconscious processes at 11 million bits per second. Maybe you saw something in the corner of the room that reminded you of something else, and now all of a sudden you feel anxiety, and it has nothing to do with what's going to be happening in that room if you're there for a meeting or whatever. It just reminds you. Maybe you had a debate with somebody, a heated debate, and they happen to be in the room and you see their face, and even though they don't have a major role in the meeting, you already start feeling some anxiousness and you don't know why. Now you're primed for anxiousness, and when the stimuli come in or stimulus comes in, you could be preset to go in a bad direction. So there's actually 7 phases here. We have the pre, and then we have the initial detection and the rapid appraisal, and then the assembly and consolidation, and then we get into the handoff, the transition from a neural pathway impulse to a conscious, something that can be perceived by the conscious mind, and then that's packaged into what the response should be, and then we have the closure, which would be step 7. So I break this down in one of the other sessions. But what we're doing here is, if we're not careful, we can be hijacked right off the bat. This is where your cognitive biases come into play. Your priming is huge, and we want to take control of those things But if you wait until step 3, you're too late. We take control of them here at step 2. That's why this step is so important. And it's also, as I'll show you, the way to get things back on track if we should fall off. Now, I just said, how do you get things back on track if you should fall off? So this is the variant of the slide we looked at earlier, with the pre-stimulus, the conditioned reaction, and then the response. What happens if a person is triggered, and you've seen enough videos where somebody's triggered and you can see there's no rationale, you can't have a rational conversation with them, they're convinced that they're under some kind of a threat. Now you might think that the people are lying, and sometimes they probably are, but the subconscious will often recreate the perception to match the feeling. And so if they're having all this anxiety, it'll recreate the perception, which could lead to, in their mind, recreating the facts. You may have heard people arguing a point and they'll die on it, and there's just no logic for them to have that belief, but they can't change, they can't let it go because the feeling is so strong and it's made them believe that it's actually true. Now, here's what I'm depicting. When step 2 collapses, you don't get any pre-stimulus. Your pre-stimulus is simply the conditioned reaction that happened before. So it's conditioned reaction right into pre-listening and then back into detection. So now you're creating your own stimulus along the way. And this will continue. If you've ever been in an anxiety spiral or a catastrophization episode where you just keep catastrophizing, you can't see any good, and people are trying to talk to you, a good example is if you see somebody going through a phobia. When they're in that phobic response, that's what's going on. It's just reaction to reaction to reaction to reaction. And most people are trying to stop it on the back end. They're trying to slow it down. They're trying to gain some agency or upgrade the agency in that moment, when the way to do it is to interrupt the pattern with step 2. The way to do this, remember, this is happening at millisecond level. So the pre-stimulus or the pre-listening is 100 milliseconds. That initial detection, which constitutes the reaction time, right? So when I said this here, this is what we think of as reaction time. So this is T. T minus 100 milliseconds is already listening. Then we have 250 milliseconds in this initial detection phase. And in this initial detection phase is what's going on in the reaction time. So then after a quarter of a second, now we're aware of it at the subconscious level. Still not aware of it at the conscious level. It takes another quarter of a second, and now the conscious mind is starting to come online. So this reaction time right here is where you have to get ownership of this. And the point I was making is that to gain control, we have to add the pre-stimulus back in. Fixing it on the back end is too late because you have emotions, and we'll be talking about that on Wednesday. You have the emotional response kicking in, and now it's harder to regulate. And you have 11 million bits per second versus the conscious mind, which is processing at 50 bits per second. If you're ever walking down the hallway or sidewalk and you come across somebody and they go to one side and then you go to that side, and then they switch to the other side, and then you go to the other side, and it's like, what's going on? That's that lag. That's that quarter of a second lag between the conscious picking up, or the subconscious picking up, and then the conscious picking up. So by the time you act, so the solution is you pick a side and stay there. They will catch up, and then they'll go the other way. But otherwise, you're doing this, and at a worst case scenario, you've done it like 3 or 4 cycles. But that's what's going on. That lag is why we can't get ahead of it. By the time the conscious mind is aware of what we need to adjust, it's already moved on. The subconscious is processing so fast. But if you go on the pre-side, now, the reason 250 milliseconds and 100 milliseconds, those are important numbers, is because one of the ways to gain composure is just by taking a long, deep breath. Now, when I talk about step 2, I mentioned my ritual is each morning I spend 10 minutes breathing with 15-second exhales and 15-second inhales. And I just do that for 15 minutes, for 10 minutes every morning. And it's not really meditation. My eyes are open. I'm breathing and I'm hydrating. I usually drink a liter of water during that period. And what I'm doing is taking control of the narrative for the day. So I am thinking about my day. I'm thinking about my bigger goal, my purpose, the big picture that I want to do. Then I start thinking about the steps I have to take during the next quarter, and I'm reminding myself of that, implementation, intention, style. And then I get down to the what do I have to do today? And it's just laying it out. I'm not taking notes. I'm just allowing myself to own the day. If you think about it like this, how often during the day do you think about your purpose? Or do you think about your goals? I talk about writing your goals down every day. This is something like that. Instead of writing my goals down every day, which is what I used to do, I do this now. I think about that, and everybody has a different, people, different things work for different people. That's why rituals are different. Find one that works for you. But by doing that every morning, it's so easy for me to get back composure, because think about this. I'm taking 15-second inhales, 15-second exhales. I'm doing two breath cycles per minute. If I'm during the day, if I'm in a meeting and something happens, I may jump right into a box breathing cycle. Box breathing is four counts in, 4 seconds inhale, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds exhale, 4 seconds hold, and then repeat. So now that's 4 breath cycles per minute. Just by taking in an inhale. So that was 4 counts. Just by taking in 4 counts, I've taken the narrative back from this constant scaling up. So it never happens. I mean, I just don't see it. I put on the slide reducing the intensity and reducing the frequency of stimulus, of adverse stimulus, or adverse stimuli, or adverse threatening stimuli. Just by taking in that breath, that's going to get me back to a better composure for the pre-stimulus phase. But now we have to make a difference at the stimulus response. So what we'll do next is we're going to so if I have intensity, and frequency. So this is the intensity and frequency, and I'll just call it adverse conditioned reaction. An adverse conditioned reaction is like a survival response. A survival response, essentially, that's where you're going to get the cortisol flowing, and next thing you know, you have adrenaline, and then you have a neurobiological event, and it's difficult sometimes to get back on track. So what we'll do is and let's say that our capacity, now I don't use the word overwhelm, with transformational vocabulary, I've removed that word from my vocabulary as it relates to me. But to describe what I'm saying here, let's say that at capacity, 10 out of 10 on intensity and 10 out of 10 on frequency, and we're sitting up here at overwhelmed, completely overwhelmed. And now anything that comes in is just tripping us, and we're automatically into that next, fight or flight, right back into fight or flight, and so far away from focus and engage. Now, obviously, we're not going to be moving around through life down here at a one-to-one, but I would say somewhere in here is the right place for focus and engage. So all of this here is excess, and it's using up capacity. And what people don't pay attention to is that willpower is impacted. We know from studies that willpower wanes as the day goes on. It wanes with use, and it wanes with decisions. So the more decisions we're making, the lower our willpower goes. Our heart rate variability gets impacted. Heart rate variability is directly correlated with adaptability. And when heart rate variability is low, our beta brainwaves, you go into high beta, which is stress. And the more stress you have, the less capacity you have to deal with new things coming in. So what we're going to do is talk about reducing intensity and reducing frequency. So first I'll go into frequency. We're going to use the positivity exercise. Positivity exercise is one of the most powerful tools I can offer to regain control of your life. It's conditioning. It's not knowledge. The same way if you were taking a swimming class, you can learn all about swimming standing on the side of the pool, but until you jump in and do the strokes, you're not going to start conditioning the real work. The same way with when you're training an animal. You have to focus on conditioning. It's repeated. This is the same way they train us in Army Rangers and Navy SEALs. It's conditioning. This is why the responses are automatic. They train it into the automaticity. And it's interesting that those courses take about 8 weeks, and the positivity exercise, we give you 6 weeks, 3 sets a day, and 90 seconds per set. So clearly, I mean, if you want to work on your own life design, if you have a quest, if you have anything that's important to you, this is more than doable. 90 seconds. When I first did this years ago, I did it with meals. I just connected each set with a meal, and at the time I was eating 3 meals a day, so you just do, before I eat, I would do the 90 seconds. Now, the reason it takes 6 weeks, you'll start to see results in as quick as early as the first week. The second week is when you start noticing it taking hold. I encourage you, do not stop then. You have to keep it going, because it's just the initial. It's similar to if you were training a dog and you get the dog to sit and roll over and do these tricks, and then he or she does every trick 3 or 4 times, and then you take them in front of a crowd of people and you say, watch this trick, and the dog won't do it. You have to condition it to the point where it works on a bad day of a bad week, and where it's automatic. So that's where the 6 weeks come in. Not only that, you're going to have bad days and bad weeks, but we'll also have stressful situations. So you need this positivity exercise to work in a stressful situation. This will reduce. It reduces frequency of adverse or threatening stimulus conditioned reactions, and it also reduces intensity. So what is it? I'll tell you what it's not. It's not positive mental attitude, it's not reframing, and it's not gratitude. It sounds like all of those, and I stress that because where most people go wrong with this is that they lump it into one of those three: gratitude, reframing, or positive mental attitude, and write it off and figure, oh, I already know that, been there, done that. But remember, everything I talk about is conditioning, because we're dealing with the network of neurons. It's not knowledge. To know and not do is to not know. We have to get it done at the conditioning level, and that's where the automaticity comes from. So the positivity exercise is that we're going to train the subconscious that when a stimulus comes in, before that first step, let me just bring up the slide. Before the subconscious is even aware of it, in this initial detection part, this initial detection phase, where cognitive biases, heuristics, past conditioning comes into play, this is where we're going to change the bias of the subconscious from looking for threats to assuming neutrality. And the way we're going to do that is step one. Now this is just the training. This is the 90-second sets that we're going to do. And a set is 3 reps. First thing we're going to do is think of something that was uncomfortable. Some challenge, some emotional hit. And by thinking of that unpleasant thing, you'll get some emotion, you'll get some negative feeling. I would say start small. Start small at the beginning. And then build. And as that negative thing comes up, and I use the example of getting a flat tire because most people can relate to that. As you think about getting that flat tire and being late for the meeting or missing a sale, you immediately ask the question, what's the greater positive context? Identify greater positive context. Now this is where people go wrong, because they either think that it's reframing, or it's just positive mental attitude, or just changing what it means. It's none of that. If I get a flat and I'm late for a meeting and miss a sale, and I say something like, oh, I'll just get the next sale, that's positive mental attitude. Or if I say everything happens for a reason, that might be reframing. But this is different. This is asking, what is the greater positive context? In order for me to get a flat, I have to have a car. So that's the greater positive context. Another one might be that you had a rough meeting at work. Well, the greater positive context of having a rough meeting is that you have a job. Now again, it's not positive mental attitude, it's not gratitude. Although what you're going to do next is then 3, reflect on the accomplishment. So by reflecting on the accomplishment, this could sound like gratitude. Think about it like this. I get a flat, bam, immediately. I have a car. The car is the greater positive context. The car was once a goal. I achieved that goal. Kudos to me for achieving the goal. That's the That's the 30 seconds. You do that 3 times. Every time you do it with something different, though. You want to cycle through every negative emotion you can find in your system. Every negative emotion that you could muster up, you take it through that cycle. And in the beginning, start with something very easy. I stubbed my toe. Greater positive context. I can walk. I'm so grateful I can walk. I'm just, whatever it is, there's some greater positive context. Unless there's not. If there's not a greater positive context, then it might be a real threat. The logical part of this is that if the flat tire is part of a subpart of a greater positive context, the flat tire is no longer a threat. And the subconscious can move on to look for more threats. The subconscious is going to find threats. And if you hand it one, it's going to jump on that one threat. So what we're doing is retraining it to, before it assumes something is a threat or before it assumes that something is adverse, the first thing we're going to do is check to see if there's a greater positive context for that thing. Now, everything's not going to fit there. So you'll end up reducing your frequency by about 80%. There will still be some things that have no greater positive context. Something comes out of the blue, right? And now you've got to deal with that. And you don't want to jump through hoops to find the greater positive context. If somebody robs you, that's negative, it's a threat and bad, and sure, you can make a positive attitude, you can find something positive, you can find some positive greater context, but the point is not to jump through hoops. The point is for a quick check. Remember, this is happening at the 250 millisecond level. This is automaticity. This is probably the number one thing that you can do to start regaining the narrative and to start reducing the amount of stress you feel on a regular basis, the amount of anxiety that you feel on a regular basis. So that's going to greatly reduce your frequency of threats. It's going to reduce the amount of time you get moved towards fight or flight. It's going to increase your agency. And so when I talk about going from 33,000 stimulus response cycles a day to something well south of 15,000, this is part of it. I just don't notice things anymore because the subconscious checks greater positive context, it moves on to the next one, moves on to the next one, moves on to the next one. This makes it much easier when you have to go through trial and error. I don't even call it trial and error anymore. I call it iterative development and refinement, because trial and error is such a big part of what we have to do in business now, that what I want to do is not have any lost attention units because I'm dealing with something that didn't work. If you're trying different approaches, you've got A/B testing, whatever it is, you're looking at copy, you're trying to sync up with a new market, whatever it is, you're going to have to do some iterations on it. And we don't want to get down just because something's not working. It is what it is. The greater positive context is I'm moving forward, I'm taking action. Success, the definition of success is predetermined, is consistent progress towards your predetermined personal worthwhile goal. Okay, so worthwhile personal goals, and by making progressive realization of predetermined worthwhile personal goals, by looking at success that way, you're always successful as long as you're taking action. And that reduces the amount of time we're dealing with negative stimulus conditioned reactions. It reduces that, and that means we have more agency. The second thing I want to do is look at reducing the intensity. So if I can do both of those, right? Hold on. If I can do both of those, you can see that by reducing intensity, by reducing frequency, I'm getting capacity. I'm moving back from being on the edge. I'm moving away from what could be feeling like overwhelm or being at capacity. I'm moving away from the likelihood of going into fight or flight. And we want to reduce both. We don't want to just reduce one. Otherwise, the way the subconscious works, remember, it's processing in 11 million bits per second. It's just going to use that excess capacity and come up with adding more frequency or adding more intensity. So you want to reduce both. Now, the way that we're going to reduce intensity, and by the way, in the 7-step reset, I have dozens of levers for each step. So as you think about these steps, I have dozens of levers for each one. And there's factors here: neuroplasticity or beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, and then physiology, and then here similar. So we have levers and factors for each one. I'm only giving you 2 steps that we can do in step 3. 2 actions you can take in step 3 to reduce intensity and reduce frequency. Once you start working on this, it's like unpeeling the onion. You get one thing solved, something else comes up. You get that solved, something else comes up. And remember, on the 7 performance series, hold on. We are focusing on what we can control: mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. This is to upgrade the identity, to upgrade our identity so that we can go on for our quest. Now, the quest is ideally something that's a little bit difficult for us, something that's outside of our comfort zone. And so as you go after this quest, you'll start to perhaps uncover some new associations, some new threats, some new concerns that you might be having. And that's why we revisit. This is where the multiple levers come into play. Positivity's not working, we have to do something else. This might be where we start looking at the primary question, moving it from something like, am I safe, or how's this going to hurt me, to something like, what is this telling me? What am I learning from this? Why is this here? Some other kind of a primary question. Those are just examples of the levers. But what I'll do first, what I want to do here is get back to how are we going to reduce the intensity. Some of you may be familiar with the Eisenhower matrix. In the Eisenhower matrix, so over here you have urgent, and you have important here. So this is not urgent, and this is not important. This becomes quadrant 1. So quadrant 1 is urgent and important. Quadrant 2 is important, right, but not urgent. And you may have seen this in Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's a way to prioritize. The point is, we want to reduce the amount of urgent and important things that we're doing, because when you allow important things to also become urgent, you've given up some options. We would prefer to be doing quadrant 2 activities where you can plan, and then there will be some ones that come up, but we want to be focusing on doing the 2s. We want to do important things before they become urgent, and then not important but urgent. And I used to use the example, if the phone rings, is that urgent or is it important? And you'd be surprised at how many people say it's important. Well, you don't even know if it's important. It could be a wrong number. It might not even be urgent. How many times have you gotten off of a phone or rushed to get to a phone call to only find out it's a wrong number or it's a telemarketing call? So just because the phone is ringing does not make it important. And I love working with offices who, when a phone call comes in, if they're already working with somebody who's directly in front of them, they don't, I'm sorry, if they're working with somebody who's in front of them, they'll put the phone call on hold. They won't handle who's on the phone because they're going based on who got there first. It's very important. It's a minor thing, but it's important. It has a lot of impact. So this is sort of like a template. This is another form of a template. So I talked about the primary question. This is like the handoff. So when we're talking about the handoff section over here, as we talk about this, what we're going to do is and we have to fix this. This is where it starts to hand off to the conscious. Remember, we're going from neural pathway signals, neural pathway impulses, to what's perceivable by the conscious mind. And as we move into this, we're packaging that reaction, consolidating that reaction into a response. Step 4 is going to be a response. And as we move that into a response, it's sort of like locking in whatever our decision is going to be from the reaction and response packaging. And that's where you go through this template. You add this template in that says, is this important and urgent, or is it just important, or is it just urgent? And the way to decide if something is important is to ask yourself, what's the adverse impact if I don't do it? What's the worst case scenario if this goes sideways? What's the likelihood that this is going to go sideways? You want to get those qualitative type questions out there to assess whether or not this is important or urgent, so you're not chasing everything. This will decrease your frequency because you'll find out that a lot of things are just urgent. And if it's urgent, why am I going to spend time messing with it now? I've got other things to do. This is how we go from having 33,000 stimulus response cycles per day to something less than 15,000. So it's not so much changing and to where 95% is no longer by habit. I'm fine with 95% being by habit. I just don't need to be reacting to every little thing that comes up. So what we'll do is I'll give you some examples of things that can help reduce frequency. I'll do both. Reduce frequency and reduce intensity. So I already said the positivity exercise actually works on both, but I'll put it here. Because what it's doing is flagging fewer things that need our attention. Another one might be meditation. I mean, think about it. Just my 10 minutes in the morning, 15-second inhales, 15-second exhales, I'm not having many stimulus response cycles during that period. I'm controlling the narrative. I'm thinking about the things that I want to think about. It's like if you're meditating, you may have to keep pulling your mind back, but you're not experiencing the same stimulus response cycle every other second. You're pulling them back. You're not even letting the stimulus response cycles complete. There is associations. They may be stimuli, but they're not being completed. Another one is attention. This is a big one. I use this one a lot. So if I feel myself hitting something that's maybe potentially stressful, I'll just change my attention to something else. I'll sometimes just turn my head, focus, look at something, because I want to catch it early. The earlier that you catch it, the more effective you're going to be, because it doesn't become a neurobiological event. It's a few seconds for it to become a neurobiological event, meaning cortisol is flowing and then the adrenaline, etc. And then examples for reducing intensity is transformation of vocabulary, and I already gave you an example of this where I took the word overwhelm out of my vocabulary. I don't experience overwhelm. I don't experience rejection. I changed the meaning of the word rejection, and I changed the definition of what it is when a person says no. So instead of, if you're in a sales call and they say no, instead of that being rejection, it's offer wasn't appreciated. And now I took the word rejection and said, I will feel rejection if I back off of my goals because of fear. So it's not just backing off of goals, but backing off the goals because of fear. And that's how I got myself to do a lot of things that were uncomfortable and stepping into difficult situations. And then we talked about the Eisenhower matrix. And that's the quadrants, right? And then also another one that'll reduce the intensity is the primary question. So these are things you can do right away. But I'll tell you, it's very difficult to adopt them or embody them when you're already in the stressful situation. You want to be in a place of calm to be able to use them. And so you build them in, change the primary question, you start implementing the template, the Eisenhower matrix. And how do you do that? It's the same way you condition anything. You just repeat it. You can start with the visualization. You just imagine, like, implementation intentions. Something's coming up and you change the primary question. You're getting a reaction response, you go to the Eisenhower matrix. Or maybe another template might be the problem-solving model. What's the 5-step problem-solving model you're going to apply? And that's how you start to get reduction of the frequency and intensity. And the other thing I'll add is these are not hacks. This is a reset. The reason hacks don't work is because of this thing called homeostasis, where the system is always wanting to stabilize, and in the process of stabilizing, it's going to absorb what those hacks are, and they're not going to work anymore. By doing a complete reset, by putting in new templates, by changing things at the conditioning level, then you're making changes. And you might have to retune it. You may have to come back to it. Just like the same way if you're training a dog, you don't just train it one time and walk away. You have to keep reinforcing it. Good thing with humans and with yourself, when you reinforce it a few times, it starts to take, because the best way of changing a habit is not to change the habit, but to replace it with a new habit, and that way you get new neural pathways, you get the myelination. Eventually the synapses will move away, gets pruned from the old neural pathways to be used for the new neural pathways, and the old habits fall away. Now tomorrow, let me just talk about a little bit about what's coming next. So tomorrow we'll finish up with this step 3 and move into the packaging between step 3 and step 4. And I started with this slide here. The 4 pillars of emotional intelligence. Self-awareness and self-management is what I'm talking about in December and January. So we're going to continue with the 7-step reset, but instead of talking about it in the context of anxiety, crushing anxiety, stopping the spiral before it begins, we'll be talking about it in terms of transformation, in terms of living our best life, pursuing our life design. That's that self-awareness and self-management. Then in February, we'll be talking about leading others, and that we start with one-to-one, and this gets into the social awareness. And then in March, we get into the executive leadership, which is setting the climate and the environment, which leads to culture. And that's the social awareness and relationship management. So we're going through, we're looking at using the 7-step reset model, and especially the 7 phases of the 1-second model. We're looking at using those to make emotional intelligence actionable. That's the objective here. Emotional intelligence is solid. Self-determination theory is solid. What dynamic leadership does is pull them together, but it does it in a way that we can execute it at the speed of life, which is the 11 million bits per second, which is why I spent so much time on the 7 phases of that 1-second model. So we'll keep coming back to that. And this is why I say dynamic leadership is very scalable. We don't have to learn a new model for each of those levels, for leading and then for setting the climate. We're going to keep using the same 7-step reset. We'll use the same 7 phases. Now, what you do in those might change, right? The conversations you have will change, but leading is leading. And then we get to that next layer of the what, but we already figured out the how, and that's where the emotional intelligence and the self-determination theory come into play, and the dynamic leadership wraps all that up for us. Now, I'd like to have the make sure that we have time to do some Q&A. So I'm always open. You can see the link is in the comments. It's in the chat. You just click that link and you'll come online. I'll see you come on, and then I'll just invite you in. You can do it from your phone, you can do it from a computer, and it doesn't have to be about today. It could be about anything that we've talked about in the past. So if you watch one of my videos or you saw a clip from some of my content and you want to have some questions, maybe you are into emotional intelligence, you want to look at some distinctions, maybe you have some challenges you want to make. The way I approach challenges is this: if you disagree with me, then I disagree with me until we figure out who's missing information. I don't want to get into this endless debate. I know what works for me and what I've studied and what has come up. I don't need to sit here and defend it. But if we have some challenges, I'm willing to look at both sides and figure out who's missing information. And then we can always go offline if it's going to be more in depth than that. But yeah, so feel free to come online. Just use that link. Click the link. I'll see you requesting the opening, and we'll go from there. All right, tomorrow I'll talk about emotional modulation, which is actually step 5. But I'll talk about it in the context of it's a major decision that happens in step 4 and doesn't always happen. In fact, because we've reduced the intensity and we've reduced the frequency, it's likely that we won't have to ever do emotional modulation in a week's time. I don't find myself using emotional modulation more than once or twice a month. Now, it wasn't always that way. In the beginning, I had to use it more frequently, but the more you use it, the less you need. It's not the emotional modulation. It's the fact that I'm doing a better job of steps 1 and 2. All right, we'll see you tomorrow, 8 o'clock Pacific Standard Time.